let's install Linux Mint using manual partition. So let's install Linux Mint. We need to choose the language and the keyboard layout, and I don't want to configure secure boot. And since we want to use manual partitioning, I'm going to choose something else. Now, as you can see, we only have one disk and we don't have any partitions on it. Moreover, we don't have a partition table. So the first thing we need to do is to create a new partition table. This can be done by clicking here, New Partition Table, and notice that if I had any partitions here, they would be deleted once we create the new partition table. But in my case, I don't have any partitions, so nothing can be deleted. And the new partition table was created, and we can now see the free space on this disk. The first partition we need to create is the EFI partition. This partition is used when the computer starts up in the very early stages of booting up, and it handles control to the operating system. This partition doesn't need to be very big, but just to be on the safe side, I'm going to allocate 1 GB for it. So let's click on the plus icon, and let's allocate 1000 megabytes, which are about 1 GB. Here in Use As, I'll choose EFI System Partition, and OK. So we have our first EFI system partition. Next, I want to create my swap partition. So let's click on the free space again and create another partition. Now, modern computers don't really need a big amount of RAM for swap. Actually, since modern Linux systems use a swap file, we don't even have to create the swap partition. So creating a swap partition is optional, but I'm going to create it anyway. Now, how big this partition should be? So as a rule of thumb, about 2 to 4 gigabytes should be more than enough. The only use case in which you might want to allocate more is if you're going to use hibernation. If you are going to use hibernation, allocate the same amount as your RAM. Since most people don't use hibernation, 2 to 4 gigabytes, as I said, should be more than enough, and I'm going to allocate 3 gigabytes or about 3000 megabytes. And this is of course going to be used as swap. And finally, we need to choose the free space again and create our main partition. Now notice that you can create two distinct partitions, one for the operating system and another for user files. But to keep things simple, I strongly recommend to only use one big partition, and this partition will be used for the operating system as well as for user files. That's why I'm going to allocate the rest of my disk space to this new partition. The file system is going to be ext4 journaling file system. This is the recommended file system for Linux, and that's what we're going to use for this big partition. We also need to choose a mount point for this partition, and since we're only going to have one partition for our file system, the mount point is going to be / or root. So it's quite simple actually. We only created 3 partitions: the EFI partition, the swap partition, which is optional as we said, and then the big main partition, which has the root mount point. We can now click on install now, and we are informed that these partitions are going to be created. By the way, encrypting your home folder might prove more secure if your computer ever gets stolen or lost. This will prevent anyone from accessing your files unless they know your password. And that's it. Linux Mint is being installed, and as soon as the installation is done, we will be able to use it.